Hello everyone. The book that I will be talking about today is Eyewitnessing, the Use of Images as Historical Evidence by Peter Burke. Eyewitnessing is laid out into an introduction and then 11 chapters. In the introduction, Burke puts out his premise for the book in the first two sentences, where he says, "This book is primarily concerned with the use of images as historical evidence. It is written both to encourage the use of such evidence and to warn potential users of some of the possible pitfalls." End of quote. Chapters 1 through 10 have the same structure. Burke will introduce either a type of image or a way of analyzing images and discuss the advantages and disadvantages of this particular image or style as historical evidence. Chapter 11, The Cultural History of Images, is his summary chapter, where he breaks down his arguments into 4 points, which I will get to much later. In this chapter, Views of Society, Burke lays out the argument that you need to know who the art was originally produced for in order to know how to analyze it. One example of this that he discussed are early 18th century prints that depict market scenes in China. These prints were made locally in China by Chinese artists who were usually employed by Europeans. Therefore, a lot of these artworks take on a European style and were made for looking at a European way of the world, which is something that historians need to know while analyzing the art. Another part of this chapter is the idea that you can track society's viewpoints on different topics. One example he looks at is women's literacy and education. The image that is on the screen is part of a drinking cup that is attributed to the painter of Bologna and was made in Greece. The two girls were presumed to be schoolgirls due to the girl on the left holding a tablet in her hand. Another image he discusses is an 18th century painting of a rural France school, where all the boys have tablets and are writing, and the girls are just sitting there listening. These small details can show you the attitude of what different subjects are during the time that the artwork was made. In Burke's chapter on visual narration, he talks about how war has been recorded through images. Many European artists would create images of battle that were initially commissioned by rulers and governments as oil paintings, and then would be later made into engraved copies so they could be distributed more broadly. The image on this side is the Battle of Eylau by Antoine John Gros, and it shows Napoleon in victory. This was a very common form of war propaganda, where the leader of the battle is shown with a heroic pose. As photographs became more popular, it was hard to capture small moments, so therefore many photographers would take before and after shots to show the changes, but not actually shoot during a battle. Later on with photography, the style of war photography would change from a more heroic style, such as this painting, to a factual style. One of the most famous images of the horrors of war is the napalm attack, which is by Hoang Truong Tu. This photograph is a group of young Vietnamese children that are running down the road with one child completely naked after an attack. Images such as the napalm attack have the ability to bring small details to the broader public that could be missed by both written and verbal reports. Burke will also discuss the limitation of photographs and film. One example that he discusses is Franz Boas' recorded dances of the Quakie people who lived in modern-day British Columbia in 1930. Boas did not change anything about the dances themselves. However, he recorded the night dances during the day. This means that those dances are not a spontaneous event that he recorded, but, as Burke says, a special command performance. End of quote. Another example that Burke gives is the Robert Gardner film of ritual warfare among the Dani people of New Guinea. As much as Gardner claims to have captured these moments spontaneously, they were actually many different fights that he edited into a composition battle. Therefore, when thinking of film as evidence, historians should consider the problem of authenticity. Was this moment created in real life with direction from the filmmaker? Was it truly simultaneous, or was it recreated later on set from somebody's memory? In his final chapter, Burke lays out his argument for using images as historical evidence. He starts with explaining that historians need to remember that most historical images will show the male view of the world, view of women, the middle-class view of peasants, and the civilian view of war, and so on. End of quote. His second point is that images should be placed in their historical context. How society viewed the subject of the image at that time, and also the original client and function of the image. Third, he says that groups of images are more reliable than one individual image. And his final point is that historians need to be able to read between the lines and look at both what is included but also what the artist chose to leave out of the image. Overall, the reviews for Eyewitnessing were mostly positive. I will say I could only find reviews for the first edition, and I actually did read the second edition. Michael Baxendale reviewed the first edition for the English Historical Review, and he states that Eyewitnessing is well-informed and fair-minded, and it prompts one to quote, end of quote. He does bring up the fact that to do the sort of study that Burke proposes, one needs to have a lot of prior knowledge of the source reality from other sources, end of quote. Another reviewer, Paul Betts, for the Journal of Modern History wrote, the book gives readers dozens of introductory lessons in reading images critically as historical evidence. His book should and deserves a wide audience, end of quote. He also mentions that the book occasionally feels rushed and could have benefited from, quote, more careful elaboration and illustration, end of quote. Overall, I agree with both of these reviews. I think this book is a great introduction for the study of images, but it probably could have been expanded at points, and it is a lot of information in 10 chapters. My 3 questions are, what are the advantages and or disadvantages of placing images into their historical context? What other types of artifacts or evidence could this style of analyzation apply to? Why do you think so? How would you propose to analyze images when you do not know who the creator or original audience was? Thank you, and I can't wait to see the discussion that occurs.